as a young adult, of course, I used to tolerate a lot. And I believed that giving more, loving more, pouring more of myself into a relationship might change the other person, might convince them to act a certain way, behave a certain way, or to treat me a certain way. That's never really the case. The only thing that can change a person is if the person wants to change themselves. And if there are going to be tangible repercussions, tangible accountability, those are the only two ways a person can be changed.
Welcome to Project Loving Myself, the podcast where we dive deep into the messy, beautiful journey of self-discovery, self-love, and healing. I'm your host, Sanaya Gurnamal, relationship reinvention coach and love alchemist. The most important relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. Let's start this journey together on Project Loving Myself. Welcome back to Project Loving Myself, where we get real about loving ourselves from the inside out. Today's conversation is about something that might feel confronting, but deeply liberating. We're talking about the love you think you deserve. Because the partners we choose, the behaviors we tolerate, the standards we set, or quietly lower, they often mirror our self-worth more than we realize. And for so many high-achieving women, strong, independent, accomplished on the outside, love is the one place that still feels like they aren't winning. Why do I keep choosing the same dynamic? Why does chemistry feel intoxicating but inconsistent or unstable? Why do I question my worth in love even when I don't question it anywhere else? Joining me today is Sammar Shabir, author of The Barred Window, senior certified professional life coach and founder of Rewrite with Sammar. Her work explores identity, self-concept, and how our early attachments shape the relationships we step into as adults. Today, we're unpacking how childhood attachment influences adult love, why we tolerate certain behaviors, and how moving inward changes who we're attracted to. Because being chosen isn't the same as feeling worthy. Sammar, welcome to Project Loving Myself.
Thank you so much, Anaya. I'm really excited to be here, and I've been waiting for this for a long time. And I'm excited to start.
All right, so let's start here. When you say the love you think you deserve, Sammar, what do you mean by that? How does self-worth quietly determine who we choose and what we accept? And I know we're starting with a big question, but I want to get right into it.
So I read a quote the other day online, which said, you can tell how much somebody loves themselves by the partner that they've chosen for themselves. And I feel like that is such a fitting definition, of one's self-worth, because a lot of women, while they seem confident on the outside and while they're in high performing roles, leadership roles, many women still tend to accept the kind of love that doesn't, do them justice. They'll accept the bare minimum just to belong in a certain place. Or maybe they'll perform or put up with a lot of things that in retrospect, once a relationship is over, they come to realize because even in my own relationships, when it ends, I tend to think about the things that I should not have tolerated rather than the things that I should have done more. Whenever you look back, that's the common, pattern that comes up. So I feel like your self-worth is directly proportional to the kind of behavior you're willing to tolerate.
And why is that? Why is that, Sammar? Like, where does that come from? I completely agree with you. I say this all the time with my clients, with my students, and the things I teach as well. But in your perspective, Sammar, why does that happen? Why do women tolerate less than they deserve?
So, see, I feel like there is a direct link to your childhood, your relationship with your primary caregivers, and your relationship with your partners. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, and even if a client comes to me with a certain problem, that is a pattern that I always pick up. Whoever has the most difficult, whoever has the most, toxic dynamic in a relationship setting tends to have a childhood where the primary caregiver was in a way lacking in certain areas.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. Suppose you have a primary caregiver who isn't very attentive to your needs, isn't very available, emotionally available. Your brain isn't basically designed to help you succeed. It's designed to help you survive. So it's going to latch on to the most familiar pattern, something that is familiar rather than um, diving into new territory or trying to grow as a human being. That is something that is intentionally done. That isn't your basic setting, the brain's basic setting. So, whatever seems familiar from your childhood, your brain is going to repeat that pattern in adulthood, especially because the most formative relationship that you can have is that with your primary caregiver. And in adulthood, that is with your relationship partner. So it tends to look for the familiar. And if there is a familiarity, if it is, there's this saying, oh, I feel like I've known you my entire life.
Mhm.
In movies, we get to see that a lot. And I feel like that is such a huge red flag, especially as a young adult, because you need before. And I feel like nobody goes into a relationship knowing all of these things. It always happens after something goes wrong. And of course, you experience pain, and then the brain suddenly stops, recalibrate and everything. So there's a direct relationship between your relationship with your primary caregiver, how your childhood was, and that with your relationship partner
I want
in
to
all gravity.
I want to highlight something you said. You said, Summer, that when you meet somebody and it's like, I feel like I've known you for the longest time. Like you feel very familiar. And normally we would look at that and say, oh, that's a really great thing to happen. It's like you connect with someone, it's familiar, it's like someone you could be friends with because you just have this energy of feeling comfortable with them. But what you're saying is that could be a red flag because if you are feeling like someone is familiar to you, or perhaps they remind you of someone, or you're too comfortable, it
Yeah.
may not mean that this is a good relationship or that this could turn out well. It might mean that you're just repeating something that you have already experienced, either in childhood or in some other negative situations. That's basically what you're saying, right? And I think that's very interesting. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So I'm saying you might repeat this, not necessarily, especially if you have self awareness, not then. But you see, even in the animal kingdom, pigeons are attracted to mates that look like their parents. Like I remember I was when I was a young adult, I used to be attracted to men who smelled a lot like my father. So there is this direct link between your relationship patterns and your childhood patterns, your primary
Yeah.
caregiver, how you were raised, basically.
Yeah.
So naturally, biologically, over time, over time, you're designed to be attracted to the familiar because your brain is designed to keep you safe, to help you survive. And of course, uncertainty is something that the brain doesn't appreciate.
Right.
So even if you're not being intentional about it, even if you're not thinking about it subconsciously, you're going to be attracted to the kind of partner that reminds you of a romantic setting that you have witnessed in your childhood, be it that your parents relationship, or even how your relationship with your parent was.
Mm.
So in your head, especially if your relationship with your parent wasn't the healthiest, in your head you're trying to resolve something,
You're trying
like
to fix it.
have
You're trying to fix it.
if you have a difficult relation if you've had a difficult relationship with a parent, in your head, because your brain tags the romantic relationship as one of the most formative important relationships of your lifetimes, and it is going to be that way, like your relationship with your parent. So it's trying to resolve something that remains unresolved in your mind. And if you don't do the work and do it intentionally, you're going to repeat the patterns and you're going to try to resolve it through the relationship instead of, going into a relationship healed. You can never be fully healed, but relatively healed or having more self awareness. So, in that respect, I feel like, this phrase, oh, I feel like I've known you since the longest time. I've known you forever. Like, I feel like I've known you forever. that could be very dangerous, especially if you don't have the self awareness, and especially if you've not done the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say a couple of things, Summer. I've seen it go both ways. For example, you may be in a relationship or attracted to someone, and you're aware that they remind you of, let's say, your father. And it could happen the other way is you actually don't want to be with someone who's like your dad because maybe it was a troubled relationship and you think you're finding a partner who's completely different from your father and yet, years later you reflect and realize, "Oh my god, I really did marry my father." And I didn't know this when I married him or when I started dating him, but eventually you start to see that there were a lot more similarities that you didn't perhaps see in the beginning. So one way or the other, you do end up, um, you could say, coming face to face to what's familiar. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, and the second thing I wanted to say, Summer, is often our relationships, right, which reflect our unhealed wounds, our unhealed relationships from the past. Like you said, we're trying to fix it, we're trying to correct, we're trying to resolve. And I love that we're talking about this because a lot of people don't want to deal with the past. They want to get over it, they want to move on, and they want their next relationship to be better than the one they've grown up with or their previous one. When in fact, what you're highlighting or what you're essentially introducing is the idea that if you don't deal with the past, if you don't heal from it, if you don't find some kind of resolution in your heart, even if it doesn't involve the other person, right? You will recreate it because your brain needs to fix it. So the best
Absolutely.
way forward is before getting into any relationship, and if you are in one, you can still do the healing. You want to clean up the past because that is the best chance of survival. That is the best chance of creating a beautiful relationship for your present and for your future. And that is the one thing you can control.
I'd like to just take a moment about what you said. Like it can go both ways. You said that. And see, many women tend to look for partners who do not remind them of their fathers. And even in that setting, if you go into a relationship with an unhealed state, you will be triggered by anything the partner does that is remotely reminiscent of what their father or their past relationship was like.
Right.
Like, suppose if, I'll give you another example. Suppose if a woman is in a relationship, if her father was a smoker and she's made this decision to not date a smoker. And even if there is a slight instance of a smoking pattern in the new relationship, there's going to be trouble because that is going to trigger you. And unless you resolve the trigger, it's going to keep showing up. So it's rarely ever about the other person, but more about the pattern.
Mm.
So, walking into any relationship without self awareness, without having done the work, is a recipe for disaster because no matter how many partners you change, no matter how much you want to move on from the past, it's going to show up in one way or another, in another body, in another setting, in another person.
Right.
So it is so important to actually have an understanding of your own self, even if you're not doing something wrong. Of course there are some patterns that might be showing up for you. So if you don't do the work, that's going to keep repeating, whether you choose a partner that is very different from what you experienced in your childhood or relatively similar.
Yeah.
Either way, it's going to trigger you. So
Basically, you're screwed both ways unless you
absolutely,
work
unless
on
you do
it.
the work. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Summer, another thing that you said, right, is you talked about the smoking example. So I'm going to use that one, right? The issue is not that you had a smoker father and then you have a partner now who smokes and it triggers you because you've obviously not resolved that trigger from your childhood or from your past, right? The issue is not that the partner, your current partner, is a smoker. The issue is that his smoking triggers you, correct?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes,
It's not
absolutely.
the behavior that's the problem. It's that something about that behavior rubs you the wrong way, not because your partner is doing the behavior, but because that behavior in the past came with some kind of negative consequences.
Absolutely. And see, even if the behavior isn't, if it's a negative behavior, there is, a level of negative behavior. If the behavior isn't appropriate and your reaction to that behavior is far worse than is required in the moment, that's because you're triggered and it's going to create a problem.
Overreacting. You're
Overreacting to the
overreacting. Yeah.
situation. Yes, absolutely. So yes, it's less about the behavior. It's more about the pattern from the past. Less about the stimulus, more about the pattern, what you've experienced.
Yeah.
So even even if that happens in the new relationship, that's going to trigger you, and of course that is not somebody else's responsibility to cure or to fix, because that is your own wound. And even if another person tries to do so, nobody can help you heal. You need self-awareness and you need to do the work. So in that in that situation, you can do a lot of stuff that can sabotage the behavior. So yes, that is how it goes as well.
Yeah. So going back again to the whole smoking example, my father was a smoker when I was a child. He was, if I remember correctly, a pretty heavy smoker. And I didn't have a problem with it. I don't have these memories of like being affected by the smoking. It's not like I remember, the smell or having any kind of negative feelings about him smoking. But what I do remember is my mother hated it. And she would always complain about smoking and wanting him to stop smoking. I vaguely remember it was something about his health. Like she didn't want him to be a smoker because it was bad for your health. And one day my dad, cold turkey, quit smoking. Okay. Now, I always felt, or my mom and I would, when we talked about it, it would be like something about my father would not necessarily um, listen to my mom. But when I got in this case about quitting smoking, he did. So I grew up with this feeling like I was responsible or I was able to make my dad stop smoking. Now, when I married my husband, he wasn't really a smoker, but like a social one.
Mhm.
And I would get triggered by smoking. I didn't like it. I didn't like the smell. I didn't like it in my room among my clothes. And eventually, like, essentially gave my husband an ultimatum that if you want to smoke, it has to be by the window in the bathroom and nowhere else, which he respected. And soon after that, he quit. Okay? Now, explain that to our listeners. Unpack that with me on how this all played out. I did attract a smoker similar to my dad, right? There was that similarity. My dad quit, and I felt like in some way I, kind of encouraged him to quit, and he sort of listened to me. And in the same way, I felt I was empowered enough to, um, stand my ground, and my husband also quit. Um, though I didn't have any negative experiences really, except hearing my mother not be happy about it. So let's recap that. Let's kind of break that down.
So see, then again, you're bringing up a situation, your first experience of a romantic relationship in your early childhood. And usually that is between the parents. So then again, this is something from your childhood. And when you say you were the one who was able to convince your father into quitting, that sort of puts you in a role of the fixer. That is where you sort of associated your self worth with. Because if you could fix the situation there and you're unable to do so in the present, that's going to then again trigger you in a certain way. The intensity, the level of trigger is different. It varies from person to person and from the meaning that you've put onto something. Like maybe you might, if you've not attached too much meaning to you being the fixer, it might not trigger you to that extent. But if it did end up triggering you to a certain extent, that means you might have associated some meaning to you, being able to resolve a pattern in your parents' marriage. So that gave you that identity of a fixer, or a self inflicted identity of a fixer. So if you could not perform a certain way, you could not act as a savior or a fixer in the current situation, that's going to frustrate you a little bit. So
Right.
I think that is how your childhood shows up. It doesn't have to be in your childhood shows up in almost all aspects of your life, even in your business. So inner child healing is very important, yes, in a romantic relationship, I think that is the ultimate playground for your childhood. But your childhood patterns do show up in every aspect of your life, and you need to be very, very intentional with it, very self-aware to move forward and to grow, or to uh resolve a situation, or to make it less maladaptive, from maladaptive to adaptive. So I feel like what happened there was you trying to associate an identity, a certain role for yourself that you needed to reenact. And that is where the frustration happened.
Also, as you were speaking, what came to me, and it's interesting because I've never visited this connection because, my husband smoked for about a minute and then it was over. So I never really had to kind of go back into it. So it's coming up because of the conversation we're having. And I'm realizing or recognizing that what I fixed was growing up and watching my mother feeling like she wasn't being heard or her wishes weren't being honored. And it was a different time. It was a different generation back then, obviously, with my parents, and there was not as much balance between the gender roles as there is today. So I think what I was fixing was knowing that I could express my displeasure with something and it would be honored and respected. And when that got fixed, like resolved or corrected, it was over for me, And um, I noticed after that it didn't really matter um, if he wanted to have a cigarette or anything like that, which he honestly himself just decided he was done with it and wasn't interested. And I think if we attract certain situations to teach us things, then they don't persist when we've resolved whatever's unhealed with it. So
Absolutely. That means the loop was closed in your mind.
closed. Correct.
Yes. So it was a resolved situation. It didn't, dwell anymore in your body. If it's
Yeah.
unresolved and it can remain so for years, it's going to show up in a recurring way in multiple relationships. Like I said, in business, in every aspect of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think that is a very interesting perspective that we've gone into. But I want to switch over now, Summer, to tolerance, which is another very interesting aspect of relationships, right? So a lot of women tell me that they find themselves in situations where they know it's not the best one for them, right? They know that their needs aren't being met or they aren't being treated the way they deserve, right? And they know better. They know that this is not healthy, but they stay in it. And they often tolerate behavior that um, isn't ideal. Okay. It doesn't honor them. What has been your experience with that, whether it's in your own life or with people that you have worked with?
As a young adult, of course, I used to tolerate a lot. And I believed that giving more, loving more, pouring more of myself into a relationship might change the other person, might convince them to act a certain way, behave a certain way, or to treat me a certain way. That's never really the case. The only thing that can change a person is if the person wants to change themselves. And if there are going to be tangible repercussions, tangible accountability, those are the only two ways a person can be changed. And especially, like you mentioned, a different generation, the mindset of our parents, our grandparents was very different, especially in South Asian societies. You were encouraged. The more you tolerated, the more you put up with things, you were applauded for that.
You are a better wife. You are a
You're a
better
better wife, you're a
daughter.
better mother,
Yes.
you're more patient, you're a better human being. And the amount of pain that you tolerate was at that time directly proportional to the kind of person you were a good wife, a good daughter, a good human in general. And if you ever spoke out, you were rebellious or headstrong or too outspoken,
Difficult.
opinionated. Yes,
Difficult. Yeah.
absolutely. But then again, I feel like, it is a privilege for some women to actually be in a situation where they can decide to leave. Many women, of course, put up with this out of unhealed patterns. But many women are not in a situation where they can actually take a stand for themselves. There are children involved, there are finances involved. Like I left my marriage. I started a divorce case and stuff like that. But then again, I was in a situation where I could. I can't compare my situation to somebody who's less privileged than me. So many women stay in a situation because they've not been raised to be independent, to make decisions, and they don't have financial independence. And then of course, if there are children involved, that changes the dynamic. You need to rehabilitate the children after divorce, and that is a concept that is so foreign, so alien to many people, even in today's generation, rehabilitating the children after divorce. So, yes, many women stay in an abusive marriage, in a toxic dynamic, out of hope that something might change someday, because a lot of our mothers used to teach us patience, propagate patience. The more patient you are, ultimately he'll change. He'll grow up someday. He'll stop doing that someday. You just have to be patient. You just have to change him. So they're staying with that hope in their minds. And many
Oh,
women,
Summer, I want to interject for a second, okay?
yeah,
On that
absolutely.
thought, on that note. I heard the same thing growing up, right? And there were instances where I have seen firsthand that women who ride it out, they stay, they're patient. There have been changes in their partners. The hope essentially, reaches some kind of fulfillment or fruition. But I just thought it's very important to note that that situation, that circumstance, is like one out of like 100, maybe. You know what I mean? But our like the previous generations would essentially focus on that one success story and make it sound like it could happen to everybody, and it would happen to everybody if they only stayed patient. Because I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I have seen it happen,
As have
where,
I, yes.
yeah, partners do change with patience and with love and so on. But most of the time, they don't.
But
So,
then again, it depends on the other person's, decision to change.
Mhm.
Change is a decision. It's not something that just happens
Right,
magically. And
right.
the other person needs to decide, make that decision. And you can't make that decision for them. So either, but then again, leaving a relationship is also very hard. Change is hard, leaving a relationship is hard as well. So I've had so many clients come up to me, and they're thinking of divorce and stuff, and I tell them to do the math, because it's going to be hard on this side, it's going to be hard on the other side as well. You need to do the math and see where your priorities sit. So if somebody decides to ride out a situation, and if they feel like in the current circumstances that's the best bet, of course, by all means. But then again, change can only happen if the other person is willing to change, because so, like, after my own divorce, I heard multiple times, oh, you weren't able to control your husband, you weren't able to change him, you weren't able to, that's such an
It
ignorant thing
feels
to
like it's your failure. I've heard that too.
absolutely.
That it's your fault that it didn't work out, even though you might have been the one who, was abused or bore the brunt of the relationship.
So many women from the older generation have said that to me, you weren't able to control your husband. Then again, out of, like you said, multiple examples, if there are a minority of cases where the change has happened, that's usually because the man or the woman, the toxic partner, decides to make a change. And unless that partner doesn't decide that, you can't do anything about it. You can't, the free will is one thing you can't do anything about.
Right.
So I think that's very important to note because a lot of gaslighting, and especially women who are going through difficult situations already, and if they're, if a certain mindset, if a certain outcome is presented before them and used to gaslight their situation, I think that could be even more detrimental to their mental health in an already struggling situation.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what is important to highlight here as well in this part of our conversation is the idea that it's not as much, it's that do you think your partner has even a small desire to change or to um, improve your marriage or relationship? Like that needs to be there, even if it's a small inclination or some kind of
The
sign,
potential to change.
the potential to change. I think you put
That's
it
a very
really
dangerous
aptly.
bet you're making.
It is a very dangerous bet. But I think a lot of people stay without even that.
Yeah,
So if you are one of those people who is trying to write it out, the one question you need to ask yourself is, am I the only one who cares enough to do something about this relationship? Is my partner, invested in this relationship the way I am? Because if they aren't, if they have no desire to change, if they don't think there's anything wrong with themselves or their marriage,
absolutely.
then, there really isn't much hope. And waiting for the someday that they might change their mind, that is a very, very dangerous situation to be in.
That is, and many men change after they've crossed 40. I've even heard some women say, oh, he's going to grow old someday. He's going to lose the libido someday, stuff like that. And then it's going to be different. So you can sit and watch your entire life pass you by, or you can actually be an active participant in your own life. But then again, there are many variables, involved in making a decision to leave or to choosing to stay or to leave: financial independence, children, societies, cultural expectations, and your own ability to tolerate discomfort, because of course
Mm.
leaving a relationship isn't going to be easy by any means, not on your mental health, not on your financial health, not on your physical health. So a lot of variables are involved. I think many women who stay feel that this is as good as it can get, even in dysfunctional relationships, and sadly, in many cases that is the truth. But if you have a situation where you can actually make a change in your own life, be an active participant, create your own life, I feel like, you know, uh, choosing to leave a dysfunctional relationship could be the best thing you could do for yourself, including for your children.
Yeah. And I'm of the same belief, Summer, though I do sympathize and completely understand when a person feels like that is not something they can do. I'm sure
Yeah,
you do too. It is hard, as you have highlighted, right? As you have noted, it is hard. There's so many considerations. But you're right in saying that there's actually so much more for you should you decide to want something better than that
absolutely.
situation, right? And I have seen over and over again that brave women who have had to overcome all these challenges and difficulties, who have had to be at odds with society and culture, who have, not even known if they could financially support themselves without that abusive relationship, who have children. I've seen many women in that situation
Yeah.
do the brave thing, do the difficult thing, do the extremely painful and uncertain road, take that road, and their life has only gotten,
Oh,
so much better,
absolutely.
tenfold.
Absolutely.
I almost always see that they end up with someone who loves them the way they deserve. So we started the conversation, right? Being loved the way you deserve. And sometimes doing that hard thing leads you to the very thing that you deserve to have, which is to be loved for who you are.
I guess you reach that point when you've done the inner work. Once you leave a relationship, of course, no woman wants to uproot themselves, especially if there are children involved. She comes to a crossroads where a decision needs to be made. And if she's made such a decision, I think a woman, you called such a woman brave. I would say more than bravery, it's a woman's ability to tolerate discomfort, to tolerate uncertainty, to, understand that this situation is also going to come with repercussions, and bearing those repercussions is her own responsibility, nobody else. So I feel
Okay.
like
Sammar, I'm going to interrupt for a second. But isn't she already tolerating discomfort by being in a relationship where she doesn't feel loved, valued, respected, any of those things? Isn't she in a constant state of discomfort anyway? It's just familiar discomfort, right? It is the kind of discomfort she's been gotten so used to that it feels normal, but it still is discomfort.
But that's the kind of discomfort that is a bad investment because it's not going to bring her anything. The other kind of discomfort is a good investment. So now, I mean, I ever since I've started, business coaching and stuff, I try to link the two. I try to look at every situation as a business opportunity. That's how business is done as well. So, but then again, in personal relationships, I mean, situations, this mindset hardly ever is highlighted. If you're tolerating discomfort in a toxic situation, that's not going to get you anything. That's not going to, improve your life in any possible way. If you decide to leave, if you decide to build on your own, if you decide to go the other way, that is discomfort, which has a higher return on investment.
Yeah, it has an
So
upside. It has
it
an
has an
upside.
upside. So yes, that discomfort makes sense. If both the situations are uncomfortable, you have to put up with discomfort in either the situation.
Either way.
Yeah.
Right?
But you need to look at the end result. So I guess every woman, I mean, whenever a client comes to me with the prospect of divorce, I tell her to do the math. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a financial benefit. It could be a spiritual benefit, a better relationship with your children, a healthier version of yourself, even.
Yeah.
So doing the math.
Right. And doing the math, if you were to actually spell it out for someone who's in this situation,
Yeah.
right? Is it like a list of pros and cons? Is it, what do they have to give up and what do they stand to gain? How would you guide someone to do the math? Because it's not just about leaving a relationship, right? Samar, it's doing the math is important in any choice you make,
In
right?
any choice, actually, yes. That's a very interesting question and one I have not been asked before. But I I feel like doing the math looks a lot like, looking at every situation, like I said initially, as a business investment. Because whether you decide to leave or stay, that is a decision you need to make. It's like an intentional choice.
Mhm.
So it's going to come with pros, it's going to come with cons. And you, after you've made the decision, nobody else can be responsible for the repercussions because there are going to be repercussions and a lot of collateral. So you need to have a clear understanding of what you're going to be putting yourself through financially, emotionally, physically, socially, in every possible way. And assess whether that is something you're willing to mess around with. You're willing to stand the collateral in that department. If you are, by all means, or if you feel like you can actually contain the collateral, by all means, that is like a pro. Just making a choice on a whim or on the possibility of a better future is a very dangerous game. So you need to make the situation as tangible as possible for yourself, at least in your head, when you're making the decision. So you need to lay down all the things that are going to be impacted by this decision, and you need to figure out whether that is something you can manage in the future.
Right.
It's going to be hard, or whether it's something you have the ability or the resources to manage ability and resources. Or if you don't have the resources, can you create those resources for yourself?
Correct. So in business terms, it's like, can I hedge the risks,
Abs-
right? Can I find the right support system
Yes.
that might help me deal with this situation? Do I
Yeah,
have maybe
absolutely.
family members? Do I have a friend?
And finances,
And
which
finances. Can
finances is so important.
right, finances is there something I can start to do today to make myself more financially, independent should I choose to take a decision in the future? So there's the different ways to manage the risks and the outcomes. Um, so I think the bigger decision becomes, um, what is it worth to me to have, this kind of a life versus another one. So staying might be this quality of life, and leaving might be a completely different possibility of a life.
Yes, absolutely.
And these are very difficult decisions to make. And I guess what we're both saying is it's not a decision we make lightly, but it is a decision that you should be able to look at with awareness and understanding and make a very intentional choice about it. As opposed to, I think, what a lot of people do, which is let's not make any decision at all. Let's just stay where we are.
Or let's just wait it out. Let's
Let's
just
just
stall
wait it
the
out.
decision.
Yeah, let's stall. Exactly. They just
Yeah.
stall, and in the stalling, life
Maybe when the
just
kids are older, maybe once we move, maybe once this happens, once
yeah,
my mother is better, maybe waiting for the right moment. And the right moment is never going to come.
it's never going to come. Absolutely. Summer, let's go into this idea of being chosen versus feeling worthy. So they may sound similar, but they're very different ideas, especially in the relationship context. How would you define that, being chosen by someone and feeling worthy of love? And I'm going to give you a little bit more context also. When we decide to be in a relationship with someone,
Yeah.
we choose each other or we feel chosen by our partner. But whether we can receive the love has a lot to do has a lot to do with whether we feel worthy and deserving of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we can only, accept what we feel we deserve. So if we innately feel we're unworthy of the love that we should be receiving, we wouldn't know how to receive love. So many people like I've seen this in anxious and avoidant dynamics quite a lot. Mostly the avoidant partner isn't able to receive the love from the anxious partner, which creates a chaotic, a very on and off dynamic between them. So if you don't have the ability to receive love because a part of you believes you're unworthy of it, you're always going to look at it from a very, skeptical eye. It's not going to feel familiar or natural to you. Feeling worthy, I guess, then again goes back to your childhood, how you've how your body, how your brain is conditioned, how what your relationship with love was as a child, how your relationship with your primary caregiver was. I feel like it goes back there again. And this desire to be chosen, this desire to, actually, if a certain person has made it perfectly clear that they're not interested in choosing you, and you still have the desire to be chosen by them, that's also you trying to resolve something from your past. Because I feel that healthy people don't like to stay where they're not chosen.
Mm.
People who have done the work, they don't invest where there is no reciprocation, there's no equal investment. So
A return.
yes, so unless you look at it with an intentional eye and you try to understand the root cause of this desire to be chosen by a certain person, or this desire to be chosen at all, I feel like this is something that's going to, create a toxic pattern, a toxic dynamic for you again. So you need to first look inwards and understand yourself, understand these wounds, where they're coming from, before you can actually, uh, enact them in a relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, for a woman who feels stuck in repeating relationship patterns, like some of the ones we've talked about, what would you want her to understand about herself? And what would you ask her to do?
Then again, if it's a pattern, it's less about the other person and more about herself, where she's coming from. Or if she finds herself in familiar situations, she needs to take a step back. It's an invitation to, look inward and try to understand why she's attracted to a similar cycle, why she keeps putting herself in situations where the same dynamics show up. What is it about that dynamic that she feels she needs to resolve? How can she link it back to her childhood or her past? What is there that she hasn't resolved? And she needs to actually reflect on that, think about that, resolve that, try to close the loop without the need of an external person, an external party, and then step into a situation or a relationship with a more informed mindset, with a more evolved mindset. She needs to actually, look at a situation where she's going to be an active participant as well. So she needs to assess whether this is something that can be sustained for a longer time or not. Because a toxic pattern rarely is sustainable. It's going to drain you of energy, your mental well-being. It's going to leave chaos in your mind. So self-love is basically, putting yourself in situations where there is less resistance to receiving and giving love.
Beautifully said.
So, and I feel like after a certain age, women mature enough to make that an assessment on their own, even if they haven't done the work. But it's still a vague idea in their heads, as opposed to concrete language.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Now, Summer, this conversation has gone deep very fast. I mean, we went into some topics that I actually didn't expect us to go so deep into. I want to thank you, Summer, for everything you shared,
Thank you so much, Sanaya.
for the perspectives that you gave. I always ask my guests, Summer, at the end of the episode, what their project loving myself mantra is that they'd like to share with our listeners. The way I want to ask you about that is you talked about, you know, leaving your own relationship. You divorced your partner, and it sounds like you have quite your own story. What is that one thing, maybe that message, that quote, that mantra that helped you get through that very difficult time in your own life? And if you could share that with our listeners today.
See, I feel like most women who leave, who have ended a relationship or have had a relationship, have had been broken up with. I feel like if they look back at the relationship and they try to, make sense of it or try to close the loop, the thing that's going to show up the most isn't, oh, I should have done more of this. It's usually, oh, I shouldn't have done too much of this. I shouldn't have given up so much of myself. I shouldn't have lost myself in the relationship. So what I actually advise to clients, or my mantra basically is look at every situation as an investment where if there is an equal return on investment in finances is the, the least important part here. In your mental well-being, your physical well-being, your love for yourself, whether they're able to improve your life, add value to it, look at every situation as an investment and only invest where there is an equal investment in return. And you cannot fix a situation or create you cannot create uh, a situation that is maladaptive cannot be made adaptive by pouring more of yourself into it. So only invest where there is and equal investment in return.
Wow.
That is what I would, suggest to women.
Wow, this conversation has been very interesting, Summer. So thank you so much for
Thank you so
showing
much.
up today on Project Loving Myself. If anyone would like to learn a little bit more about what you do, how do they find you? How do they get in touch?
If anybody wants to find me, they can on Instagram, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. So I am available by the username Sammar Shabir, and you can find more about my work and about my book. And it's published. It's got published last year, so you can learn more about my rewrite program and about my literary work as well.
Yeah. And Summer, in maybe just a sentence, let us know, what is your book about? What should people expect?
They should expect the unexpected. But my book is basically set in the time of the socio-political unrest of Pakistan as a result of the Talibanization of Afghanistan in the early 2000s. And it, much like Lord of the Flies, it blends the innocence of childhood with the brutality of war, and is a story about the search for oneself.
Wow. Powerful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanaya. It was lovely speaking to you. I had a great time.
And that was our conversation today with Sammar Shabir. Here's what I hope you'll take with you. You don't attract what you want, you attract what feels familiar. And familiarity often lives in your attachment wounds from childhood. But the moment you become aware of your patterns, you step into choice. You stop chasing to be chosen. You stop tolerating to feel safe. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. And you start asking a different question. What kind of love matches the woman I'm becoming? As Stephen Chbosky wrote, we accept the love we think we deserve. And that's the real work. If you want a different kind of love, you have to expand what you believe you deserve. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. Now, if this episode resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Go follow Summer on Instagram at Sammar Shabir, explore her work, including her book, The Barred Window, and Rewrite with Summer. Don't forget to follow Project Loving Myself so you never miss an episode. New conversations drop every Wednesday. And of course, connect with me at Sanaya Gurnamal on all social channels. I read every message. Until next time, remember, you are loved.
Now that we've debunked some of those soulmate myths, let's talk about what's holding you back from love. If you're ready to dig deep and discover the hidden love patterns that could be creating the challenges in your love life, I've got just the thing for you. Take my Love Blocks quiz and find out what's getting in the way of attracting the right person and getting the love you deserve. Just answer the questions and you'll get personalized results to help you overcome your specific love block. Just click the link in the description below to get started. Let's get you from love blocked to being with the love of your life.